Thank you for listening to the Damage Report podcast, the show covering the true threats facing our country and what you can actually do about them. You can support this free podcast by leaving us a review and giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening to it. Every review helps more people discover the show at no cost to you. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Damage Report. It's Tuesday, I'm Iadarola, and we've got a gigantic show. It's one of those awesome shows where we have a great balance of both important news stories to get to and awesome guests to discuss the news with. So in the first section, we are gonna be talking about the US defense budget. Some massive hypocrisy coming from the president on how much we should actually be spending on defense. And I wanna put it in a little bit of context, both in terms of US military spending over the past decade or so, and the international sort of military economic environment that we live in. Later on in the show, we've got some announced reforms coming from the DNC on attempting to strip some of the bias that was evident in the 2016 primary process. We're gonna be going over those proposed reforms. And AOC under fire from Fox News again. I wanna compare just briefly how they deal with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez versus others, more respected politicians. We'll talk about that. We also have guests. We have Emma Vigeland coming on the show in not long, actually the next block. She's gonna be talking about her reporting in DC at the Sunrise Movement's protests yesterday. We're also gonna be breaking down all of the news on Beto O'Rourke and his apparently imminent run for the Democratic nomination for the presidency for 2020. Later on in the show, Sara Blazevic is gonna be joining us. She is one of the co-founders of the Sunrise Movement. She was at the protest. She's gonna be breaking down what they were going for yesterday in DC and where they expect to go from here based on the news coming out of yesterday's protests. We're gonna be closing the show. Meanwhile, in brief bits of news from around the world, around the solar system, should be a lot of fun, so stick around for that as well. But first, we start off with domestic news. Some absolutely massive hypocrisy coming from Donald Trump when it comes to how much money needs to be budgeted to the military. So the reason that we're talking about this is that it came out about a day or two ago that he is gonna be calling for the Pentagon's budget to be increased to $750 billion. And I know that it's become normal where if something's really costly, they express it in how much it would cost over 10 years, but no, that's 1 year, $750 billion, and it's bizarre because not long ago he tweeted this: "I am certain that at some time in the future, President Xi and I, together with President Putin of Russia, will start talking about a meaningful halt to what has become a major and uncontrollable arms race. The US spent $716 billion this year, crazy." Well, if you thought 716 billion was crazy, wait till you get a load of 750. And I also love the weird disconnect in what he says and what he does, where he's saying we're in this crazy arms race. There's gonna be so much money spent, as if he's like looking in through the window of the White House and is shocked at what he sees, when he's the one in there asking for us to drastically raise how much money we're actually spending on defense. And what is crazy about this is it's not just a lot more than he had previously thought that we need to spend. It's more than the military is actually asking for. That's something that often comes up in the news, actually. Defense Secretary Mattis and other top defense officials have been seeking a $733 billion budget for fiscal year 2020. As the president has floated a $700 billion budget, that number is now substantially higher, obviously. Now, how does the president go from one day supporting a $700 billion defense budget to a $750 billion defense budget when the $50 billion that we're talking about is larger than the defense budget of a vast number of countries around the world? I don't know, and I doubt anyone else around him has any idea where the new number came from. Apparently, it's one of the chapters in The Art of the Deal that I haven't read, though. This is reporting from The Hill saying there was a discussion with POTUS on how to get $733 billion. And POTUS suggested that if the position is $733 billion, then we should submit a budget at $750 as a negotiating tactic. And then this is a great quote. That said, the president changes his mind constantly. So that's, again, that's one of the people that works with the president. That's one of the president's allies. It's like, I don't know, man, he says numbers, who the hell knows? And so we do have to take this with a grain of salt. Will we end up with $750 billion? I don't know, but if we get anywhere near it, that is absolutely absurd. And again, 100% disconnected from anything having to do with the military or defense situation that our country finds itself in. So let's put this in historical context. If we bring up this chart, you're gonna see National Defense Budget Authority in constant 2013 dollars going back quite a while, more than a half a decade. And you're seeing there that with some exceptions, it has certainly trended upwards. It's trended upwards even throughout like the end of the Cold War. It starts going up again. The funding for Iraq and Afghanistan. So you might think, by the way, that blue is going up. It's terrorism, it's all that. But that's that separate red thing going to Iraq and Afghanistan, like all that extra supplementary money that you hear. They do the defense budget, obviously, but then 2 to 3 times per year, there's some other $20 to $80 billion thing that they add on. That happens quite frequently, and that's what you're seeing there. So again, bear that in mind. The $750 billion, if that is the actual budget, or if it's 733, it's irrelevant because that in the end will not be the limit of what we end up spending. There will be supplementary, contingency fees, overseas continuation in Syria, and things like that. 750 billion could easily become 800 or 850. And what world do we even live in? Let's talk about that. This is something that if you're watching the show, you're probably very well familiar with, but I wanna remind you of the numbers. If we can bring up this next chart, you're gonna see all the other militaries that we theoretically might have to worry about. And so this data is 2 years out of date at this point. That was when supposedly we were spending $611 billion. You see there that China is far less than half the military spending. Russia is down there at, I'm not great at math, but I'm gonna say 13%, 14%. Going down, Brazil, major economy, big military, $23 billion. Japan and Germany, the UK, our big allies, spending far less. Now, yes, historically, they can afford to spend a little bit less because, of course, if something terrible happens, we will be there to back them up. But think about what they are doing in spending $40 billion rather than $400 billion. They are putting that money somewhere else. Always, when you spend money on one thing with your government, you're not spending it on something else. I wanna read for you a famous quote. This is going back quite a while, and it is in fact a Republican that said it, but President Dwight D. Eisenhower said in a 1953 speech, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed." Now imagine how many meals, how many sets of clothing you could buy with $100 billion or $200 billion. And I want you to really seriously think, could you or the president explain what the difference to our military would be if instead of $750 billion, it was $650 billion or $550 billion? He likes to say our military needs to be rebuilt. Can he explain what that money is gonna go to? That hugely inflated new military budget? What in particular is going to be fixed? What is going to be rebuilt? Or is he just hoping that there will be so much money piled up that some of it can, it can go to build a wall on the border with Mexico and people won't even know? Honestly, at this point, I don't know, because he is not the sort of president to know those sorts of details. But while this is going on, people are just trained in this country to accept that whatever the military says they need, whatever the White House says the military needs, that is what they actually need. And at the same time, whenever we come up with grand plans to fix the healthcare situation in our country or strip lead pipes from cities throughout the country, set up public free education, we can't afford it. That's what they say. But are they making us think about $750 billion?
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of On the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, "You must unlearn what you have learned." And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
For the military, when it's already been extremely lavishly funded year after year after year after year throughout our lives, I kind of doubt it at this point. Okay, we're gonna take our first break. When we come back, Emma Vigeland's gonna be joining the show. We're gonna be talking about Beto O'Rourke's likely run for the presidency and more after this. Welcome back to the show, everybody. News everywhere. Beto O'Rourke apparently getting quite excited behind the scenes about the possibility of running for the Democratic nomination for the presidency in 2020. But should we as progressives be as excited? We're gonna be joined now by Emma Vigeland to break this down. Emma, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, John.
Always good to have you on. So let's talk Beto. I've got a couple of other topics I would like to bring up, but first, Beto O'Rourke has been all over the place, apparently meeting with Barack Obama earlier this year, meeting with Al Sharpton I saw a couple of days ago. What do you think so far about the number of stories coming out? How likely does it seem that he will in fact run?
It seems quite likely, especially now that Third Way, which is a centrist Democratic organization, has thrown its support, not officially, but many of the people that work at Third Way have been tweeting how Beto is a great candidate because he appears progressive to progressives, but to centrists like us, we like him as well, which is disappointing because Beto did run on a fairly progressive platform and ran against an awful person in Texas and was unabashedly saying, I'm not going to take corporate PAC money. But it's been revealed through reporting on Sludge with Alex Koch, who's actually worked with TYT a few times, that O'Rourke actually got around $430,000 from the oil and gas industry. They were large contributions from individuals working in the oil and gas industry. So it wasn't necessarily violating the no corporate PAC money pledge, but he did violate his no fossil fuel money pledge with those donations. So he actually took a lot of money from fossil fuel companies, which is deeply disappointing.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I want to talk about. I'm honestly a little bit conflicted on that because obviously I would prefer that anyone working in the oil and gas industry would be so turned off by the eventual Democratic nominees' positions on the environment and climate that they wouldn't want to support them. But I don't know exactly, what is Beto supposed to have done? Is he supposed to have gone through the individual donations, identified where people work, and then returned on a case-by-case basis the donations? I'm honestly not sure. With some executives, it might be a little bit easier when the numbers are higher. But when it's a person who works at an oil company, should he be returning individual donations based on where somebody is employed?
No, I completely hear that, but it just is notable. I'm not even saying it's, damning about him personally, but oil and gas executives in Texas did see that perhaps he would be more friendly to our proposals, and he was, the second largest recipient of oil and gas donations in 2018. So I think that's notable when discussing presidential candidates for 2020. Beto O'Rourke is a talented politician, and he's incredibly charismatic, but we have to be careful who we throw our support behind because O'Rourke, he strikes me as Obama to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's knows how to put his finger to the wind and see where the progressive movement is and what are the right things to say are. But maybe when push comes to shove, he's not going to do some of the more progressive things that we want, especially when we have such a crowded field. We have to be selective.
Yeah, and especially on this topic, regardless of whether it would be difficult for him to do something about it, those executives did support him, and that should worry people who have the climate change, dealing with it as one of their top issues. And so we do have to be more vigilant in the future to watch, is he changing his rhetoric now and that sort of thing. I wanted to bring something up because I found it interesting that Third Way, said what you said. At the same time, Move On recently did their straw poll of their members, and it was very tight margins, but he narrowly beat out Joe Biden and narrowly beat out Bernie Sanders. They're very, very small margins. But what's interesting is that Move On in 2016 endorsed Bernie Sanders. And at least right now, they are narrowly supporting Beto O'Rourke. Do you think that this is a demonstration of what Third Way was saying?
I think so. I think right now he's such a new commodity that a lot of people are projecting what they want to project onto him. It's sort of like having a narrator in a fantasy story that basically has no personality. You can put whatever your ideals and your personality traits are onto that narrator. And that's what Beto O'Rourke is now. Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders have been in the public consciousness for a lot longer than Beto O'Rourke. So it allows people to do what Third Way is saying. Say, oh, maybe he's a progressive. Maybe he's a Democrat that's more reasonable, right? More corporate. But the fact that Third Way is saying it should give us an indication as progressives that maybe he is not as progressive as we had initially hoped, unfortunately, because I think he's really talented and his heart's in the right place.
Well, here's a potential problem for Beto O'Rourke. If he is conscious of what Third Way is saying, if this is actually a strategy of his, I think it's going to be very hard to keep up that sort of act of trying to please everybody. Not in the abstract when he's out there occasionally giving speeches, and the only contrast is with Ted Cruz, but when he's going up against multiple actual progressive candidates, when he's on a debate stage, I think it's going to be much more difficult for him to sort of imply that he's a progressive without actually proving it with like very well-defined proposals, I would imagine.
I would imagine too, and I think a lot of what is motivating the responses in that Move On poll has to do with age, which, we're apparently told we're ageist when we don't want Nancy Pelosi to be the Speaker of the House, but when we support Bernie Sanders for president, now we don't want a fresh face. But there is this sentiment that's being put out there in the Democratic field that we need someone new, someone fresh, someone young. I think that's a load of BS, but that allows Beto O'Rourke to kind of ride that narrative to more popularity when when people are fielding presidential candidates in 2020.
And one other little concern I would say that if I were in the Beto camp that I would be worried about is that people are like you are comparing him to Obama, and Obama very quickly turned around a run from the Senate to becoming the Democratic nominee and the president, but he also won his election. He was holding office during that time. It seems like it would be more difficult for Beto O'Rourke to maintain that enthusiasm when he's going to go 6 to 9 months without any natural way to, sort of sustain a presence in the media.
Yeah, I would imagine that too, and we could pull an old Trump. I prefer presidential candidates who did win, right? Because that's true. Texas, it would have been hard to pull off, and he really did it. He had a really tough task going up against Ted Cruz, shockingly, in Texas. I don't know how anyone can cast a ballot for that man, but he narrowed the lead incredibly. It was an incredibly tight race in the end. So he has a lot to be proud of, but I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying.
Exactly. We joke, but that was always going to be an uphill battle. I also wanted to ask you, yesterday you were reporting from DC on the Sunrise Movement's climate protests outside of Pelosi's office. What were your impressions from that?
I mean, it was fantastic. There were over 1,000 people there, and there were over 100 arrests, I think around 150 arrests. I wasn't at Pelosi's office. They told the media different things. Activists sometimes, don't want the media to know exactly what they're doing, understandably. So they went to Pelosi's office. They went to Steny Hoyer's office, which is where I was. He's the #2 Democrat in the House. And then they also went to Jim McGovern's. He is on the Rules Committee, a ranking member there, a very high up there, powerful Democrat. And what was so fascinating to me was their purported goal is, we're going to stay in your office, Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, McGovern, until you come out and agree to a Green New Deal. Now, they don't actually think that's going to happen because they may not even be in their office and they have to discuss these legislative priorities with their staff. But McGovern actually came out and agreed to a Green New Deal, or a select committee on a Green New Deal, to the Sunrise protesters. So I spoke to a few of them there and they were like, yeah, we did not see that coming. So that was really exciting. I was at Steny Hoyer, so I didn't see it in person, but I heard the breaking news.
Yeah. Certainly seems to be a good amount of momentum. I also saw that Nancy Pelosi apparently has agreed to a meeting with the organization. How high are your expectations for what could come out of that meeting?
Yeah, I was about to say something sarcastic, and then you asked me directly about it. Nancy Pelosi agrees to a lot of meetings. The thing about the Green New Deal that makes it more, corporate Democrats might be more likely to accept it is because it is about the economy and is about spurring economic growth. And I know that there are a lot of people who are more progressive minded on Wall Street in the way that they, do their business, who might see an opportunity here to invest in businesses that are being subsidized by the government, green energy businesses, as opposed to dying industries like oil and coal. When you see Europe and other places around the globe really putting their money where their mouth is on climate change and having a lot of economic success in some of those sectors.
Yeah, well, hopefully we will see continued both protests from them. We actually have one of the founders of the movement coming on in 2 more blocks. And thank you again for both coming on the show to discuss Beto, but you're reporting as well for Rebel HQ.
Yeah, thanks so much, John.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna take a short break. When we come back, Fox News once again targeting AOC and in a particularly condescending way after this. Welcome back to the show, everybody. So much more news to get to. In fact, some live news. As we are recording this, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are in the White House with Donald Trump, and they are discussing the possibility of funding for the wall. I believe we have some video from those deliberations.
And
20 times,
I don't want to do what you did.
20 times
Chuck.
you have called for, I will shut down the government if I don't get my wall. None of us have said.
You want to know something?
You've said it.
Okay, you want to put that on
You've
my...
said it.
I'll take it.
Okay, good.
You know what I'll say? Yes. If we don't get what we want, one way or the other, whether it's through you, through a military, through anything you want to call, I will shut down the government.
Okay,
absolutely.
fair enough.
And I
We
am
disagree.
proud, and I'll
We
tell you
disagree.
what, I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck, because the people of this country don't want criminals and people that have lots of problems and drugs pouring into our country. So I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it. The last time you shut it down, it didn't work. I will take the mantle of shutting down. And I'm going to shut it down for border
But we
security.
believe you shouldn't shut.
Those are the adults in the room there yelling at each other. So first of all, quick prediction. In the end, he will blame Chuck Schumer for shutting it down, and the Democrats, and the fake news, and the witch hunt, and whatever. So look, there is some off chance that in the same way that everything has gone insane over the past few years, a president choosing to willingly shut down the government, which is, I would say, quite rare, would not backfire and hurt the party that's in power. Typically it does, maybe it won't this time. But it probably will. And if it does, Donald Trump is going to, of course, immediately turn and try to put it on whoever he can, whether it's Nancy Pelosi, the Democrats, Chuck Schumer, Washington Post, it doesn't matter. He's going to put it onto somebody else. It's absurd to shut it down over that. The belief that the American people care so much about the building of this wall that even at this late hour, 2 years after the election, they're going to be willing to watch, not just the obvious things like the national park shut down, but the numbers of paychecks that will stop going out, government services shutting down. It hurts the president's party for a reason. And he thinks he's gonna sign up for that willingly. That's the thing that's gonna help him after a massive wave election. Honestly, at this point, I would say go right ahead. That sounds like a great plan, probably not for you. It might serve as a necessary distraction for him from his other scandals and all that, but not one that I think is probably gonna play out in his favor. I could be wrong, we will of course have to see. That's the only video we have, but I have been keeping up on Twitter of some of the back and forth between them. Now, apparently, at least in this first very public, we have to acknowledge that, very public meeting, both Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are putting up, a strong front. That's the way it looks. So Nancy Pelosi was saying, you're not gonna win on this, we're not gonna fund the wall. I'm assuming at this point, Mexico is probably not gonna fund the wall too. So at least talking tough. And Chuck Schumer, in fact, at one point, again, sitting right next to Donald Trump said, when the president brags that he won North Dakota and Indiana, he's in real trouble. Which is a good line, I like that. More of that, Chuck Schumer. In terms of how much actual policy will be generated from this meeting, I honestly don't know. It is possible that the tone of the meeting and Donald Trump's almost assured tweet storm that will come after it could sort of poison the well a little bit. But honestly, that's a good thing. I have been scared to death of the fact that the Democrats, especially Chuck Schumer, up until recently have seemed willing to spend something like $1.6 billion in funding the wall, apparently not understanding the needs of border security or the desires of his base. Hopefully this meeting, as angry and as insulting and condescending as it is, might lead Chuck Schumer to finally wake up from this delusion and do what's necessary, not just for the country, but for his party as well. We'll keep an eye on that meeting and see if anything else develops as we go forward, but there's other news that we have to get to. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been targeted by the right, by their pundits, by the president, by their commentators and all of that, and often in a way that seems inherently biased and unfair. That is something that she has acknowledged. We have talked about previously. I have a great example of it, and I want to put it in historical context for you. So first here is, I think this is outnumbered on Fox News. You're going to see Kennedy And listen what she has to say about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez providing sort of unparalleled access to the orientation period for incoming congressmen and women in her videos that she's been posting on social media.
I like the videos because she shows how empty-headed she really is, and her brain is as empty as socialism itself and the ideas that she pushes. I don't have a problem with trolling and counter-trolling, and I don't have a lot of patience for people who get so outraged because, you know, Don Jr. says one thing and she responds. I do agree with you that people who think they're going to punch the president in the same manner as hard as he does, I think they create problems for themselves, and it's very inauthentic. Like trying to fight the president or members of his family the way that he does, it doesn't make a lot of sense, and she needs to revert back to what it was about her that resonated with voters that allowed her to unseat a popular long-term incumbent in a primary. And I think she's gotten away from that, and you know, she's bought into her own mystique, which has certainly tarnished a bit in the last few interviews.
Okay, so there's so many things there to break down. So it's not that it's tarnished, it's that you want it to be tarnished. So you should at least be willing to, like, imagine if I was like, Donald Trump, you know, he should really change his strategy because his reputation's going down a little bit. How disingenuous would that be coming from me? And in the same way, her providing advice to AOC. So that was bad, and it was worse than it needed to be, because it's one thing for her to say that, you know, this history-making youngest woman ever elected to Congress is empty-headed. That would be insulting and bizarre by itself. It would be odd, since she, of course, supports the Republican Party, she supports Donald Trump, to say that she is empty-headed, but that your president, who you continue to support and advocate for, is what, an intelligent, curious, critically thinking person? That would be bizarre. But she even brought up Donald Trump, so she understands the context that her criticisms of AOC need to exist in. And in the context of their Twitter trolling that she says. I would say that AOC defends herself, but okay, fine. Let's say that it's similar tactically to Donald Trump. So Donald Trump is authentic, AOC is not. Did you consider asking one of her followers how authentic it comes off? The people who are excited by her, the people who voted for her, the people who volunteered for her, all of that? Do you think that Kennedy on Fox News is the proper person to be deciding whether this woman's political activity is authentic? No, of course not. Kennedy is there to provide sort of straw man arguments against socialism, which isn't even what AOC is even advocating for. So I take those concerns about the inauthenticity with a major grain of salt. Donald Trump is just a big ball of furious, impotent projection. That's all he is, but she apparently can't actually see that. She sees the authenticity of a young woman providing a never before seen look into the process of integrating from a life outside of politics into elected office. We're finally seeing all of that and learning quite a bit about it. And that comes off as inauthentic and it's tarnishing her reputation. Well, at this point, I'm gonna say, I'm gonna go with AOC's political instincts rather than Kennedy's. But understand that when they talk about her in this way, that she is empty-headed, understand that the policies that she's advocating for are universally popular in general. You know, single-payer healthcare, the Green New Deal, these are all very popular proposals. And when she says that her brain is as empty as socialism, you'll note that she didn't cite any particular policies that AOC is advocating for that Kennedy thinks are easy to shoot down or show how they wouldn't work. They refuse to be specific because they don't want to mention the particular policies that AOC supports because they know how popular they actually are. They did do it once on Fox News, to their credit. On Hannity's show, he put up on a big graphic exactly what AOC stands for, and they were roundly mocked because they were insanely popular proposals. Now it's all hands off. It's all socialism is empty-headed, and expect more of that in the future. Okay, there would be more on this. Unfortunately, we don't have the time. We are gonna go to break, but when we come back, we're gonna be joined by one of the founders of the Sunrise Movement, who's been doing these amazing events of activism in DC and helping to generate never before seen support for a Green New Deal. We'll be talking with her after this. Yesterday's Sunrise Movement protests in DC have put more pressure on the incoming Democratic majority to support a Green New Deal. So let's talk about whether it's going to work. And joining us to do that, one of the co-founders, managing director of the Sunrise Movement, Sara Blazevic. Welcome to the show.
Hi, John. Thanks so much for having me.
Very glad to have you here. Very glad that you and your organization again drew so much attention to this very important topic. So for those who might not have been following yesterday's developments, could you describe the protests and what you were trying to accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. So yesterday, 1,000 young people with Sunrise lobbied 50 congressional offices and sat in at the offices of Reps Pelosi, Hoyer, and McGovern, demanding that Democratic Party leadership support the Select Committee for a Green New Deal. And a total of 143 people were arrested during the sit-ins.
Wow. Well, obviously very serious, although, as you are demonstrating, sometimes necessary to get people to pay attention to how important this is. So you were outside of the leadership's offices. How were you received by them?
It was a mixed reception. So one of the biggest wins of the day was that Rep. Jim McGovern, who's the incoming chair of the House Rules Committee, came out in support of the Select Committee for Green New Deal, which is a huge win because he actually has a ton of power over mandating that the committee gets formed. We heard from Steny Hoyer, who's the House Whip, the second highest ranking Democrat in the House, that he was happy to see us speaking up and eager to hear more. But of course, we need not just words and not just listening, but to see real action from him, Pelosi, and the rest of the Democratic Party leadership. So we're looking forward to seeing more from them.
Yeah, I love he likes seeing you guys speak up. Well, I would like to see him speak up. Actually, that would be good. Now I know. Sorry, what were you saying?
So would we. We feel like we've been doing our job, whipping House votes for the Green New Deal, and we'd like to see him do his.
Yeah. Now, Nancy Pelosi apparently also is willing to meet with your organization. Going into that sort of meeting, if it does happen, what would your expectations be?
Yeah, we'll be meeting with her staff tomorrow, and really we're just interested in seeing what her staff has to say before we make a judgment about where to move forward with them.
So I'm curious, this is now the second extremely high profile, activist effort, a couple of weeks ago, the initial action that led to all of this discussion nationwide about a Green New Deal. Obviously there's been hundreds, and in this case, 1,000 activists, super important, you guys, for organizing it. How important have the inclusion of certain newly elected politicians been, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez speaking at the first event? How important have they been?
Yeah, I think it was huge to have Alexandria Ocasio support at our first event, and it's just been amazing to see the support from newly elected Congress people for our work. Just last night, we had a pizza party following our big action with a lot of the young people who came in from out of town, and Ayanna Pressley ordered us all pizza unprompted. So I think it's been really amazing for morale and also for just getting attention from the press. At the end of the day, though, of course, it's been young people, some as young as 12 years old, who've been doing the organizing, not only here in DC, but back in their own districts. We did the week of Thanksgiving, we had in-district office visits to over 100 Congress people. And I think that is a huge part of why in just the past day since yesterday's action, we've had 9 new Congress people get behind the Select Committee on a Green New Deal.
That is awesome, and hopefully those numbers will go up quite a bit in the near future. I am curious, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves because obviously the committee has not been established, but if it is established and it's roughly similar to what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been talking about, what sorts of concrete actions would you like to see from the new Democratic majority over the next 2 years?
Well, I think the biggest thing is actually executing the work of the committee, which is drafting a plan that would move us to 100% renewable energy on the timeline demanded by science, along with a whole host of other things that are embedded in the Green New Deal. So one of the things that makes me the most excited about the Green New Deal and its power and potential to be a rallying cry for the Democratic Party base is that it ensures that resources are justly and equitably distributed in the process of transitioning our economy off of fossil fuels. And we see it as really a historic opportunity to virtually eliminate poverty in this country. So part of what's included in the Green New Deal is a mandate for a federal jobs guarantee that would give every American who wants one a good green job transitioning our economy, as well as universal health care and universal basic income. So my hope is that instead of having Democratic Party leadership say, let's get to 2021 and then we can talk about these kinds of big policies, my hope is that they see the Green New Deal as an opportunity to actually build a winning coalition for Democrats. Because like you were saying earlier, a lot of what's outlined in here is immensely popular with Democrats of all geographies, of all races, and of all party affiliations.
Yeah. And if they want to do well in 2020, this sounds like exactly the sort of platform that can help to build the coalition necessary to get a Democrat elected in 2020. Hopefully they'll acknowledge that. So I would like to ask for your advice on a topic that I think that you're quite an expert on. So we talk about climate change constantly on this show, and it has not gone unnoticed by me that when we put our videos on YouTube, those videos don't tend to get nearly the attention or views that other sorts of topics do. But your organization has gotten an incredible number of really young people, far younger than I was when I was remotely interested in politics, invested in this topic. How exactly have you gone about that? Why are these very young people so knowledgeable and passionate about a topic that it's so difficult to get people fired up about?
Yeah, that is an awesome question. So I think there's a few things. One is that climate change is affecting my generation right now, and people really know it and people are really feeling it. So when we have people come to protests like the one we staged yesterday, everybody comes with a climate story. Everybody has a story of somebody they know, someone in their family, a neighbor, someone in their community, a friend who's been impacted by the hurricanes or the droughts or the wildfires of the past few years. And I think those stories are growing more and more ubiquitous as the crisis gets worse and worse. Yeah. So part of how we understand our role and our organizing model is really inviting and empowering young people to share those stories and providing a platform to showcase to this country and to the world how present the crisis is for so many people today. Yeah. I think another piece of it is that we're not afraid to call our opposition who they are. The fossil fuel billionaires, the fossil fuel CEOs and lobbyists, and the politicians who they've bought out for decades. And I think our willingness to actually name names and say these are the people responsible for this crisis, and they have blood on their hands when people are burning alive in Paradise, California. Wow. I think that makes us compelling to a lot of young people who feel like they don't have a lot of faith in their leaders and don't really know who to believe. I think the last part of why we've been able to engage so many young people in this story and also make it such a big headline in the past couple of weeks has been that we're actually presenting a real and hopeful solution to the crisis. And the Green New Deal provides this really concrete solution as well as a really positive vision of who we could be as a country if we come together and bring all of our best brains together to solve this crisis. And I think that's really inspiring for a ton of people, not only young people, but Americans from all walks of life. Yeah.
Well, I can certainly say it is for me. So one last question for you. If someone watching this video would like to get involved with your organization, what can they do?
Yeah, you can go to sunrisemovement.org and sign up to get involved with campaigning to pressure your own representatives to back the Select Committee on a Green New Deal and to do whatever it will take on the other side of the new year to make sure that a Green New Deal is written by the end of 2019 and that we can pass it in 2021. Okay,
hopefully. Sara Blazevic, thank you so much for joining us on the show. We very much appreciate your activism and you educating us on this topic.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to be stepping out of our domestic bubble and taking a look at some news stories from around the world and, in fact, around the solar system after this. Only moments remaining, but so much to get to. Obviously, we like to dwell in our domestic politics bubble, but there's so much going on outside of our country. So every once in a while, we like to focus on these international stories in a segment we call Meanwhile In. Meanwhile, in Russia, a notorious serial killer apparently killed way more people than we originally thought. And this is Mikhail Popkov, dubbed the werewolf or the Angarsk maniac by Russian media, apparently offered rides to women late at night, sometimes in his police car, because he was in fact a police officer, while off duty around the city of Angarsk near Irkutsk. First time I've ever had to say that while not playing Risk. Apparently 2,600 miles east of Moscow, so that's in rough territory. So a court found him guilty of 56 murders between 1992 and 2007. He was already in prison for having been convicted of killing 22 women back in 2015. So This is potentially one of the worst serial killers of at least the last 100 years, if not longer. He apparently would pick up these women. He considered himself some sort of like moral arbiter for the area. So he'd pick up women that he thought were immoral. The guy murdering dozens of people thought that they didn't measure up to his high moral standards. He would pick them up, sometimes rape them, and then murder them and dump their bodies in the woods or in a cemetery. And apparently because of his training from being a police officer, he was quite good at covering his tracks, although he did eventually, once convicted of the initial crimes, admit to many more. Like a lot of serial killers, he wanted credit for the work that he had done. But in any event, regardless of the nicknames and all of that, an absolutely horrendous story. So while that was going on in Russia, meanwhile in what the hell is that picture? Oh my God, thank you, Brett. That was good, I like that. Meanwhile, in the outer reaches of our solar system, for only the second time in human history, an object that we crafted with our own hands has left the solar system. It is a probe that we sent out. Actually, let's put up this picture. You're gonna see, this is a shot with a camera. No, I'm kidding. But it's an idea of what is going on. The Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 probes have now left the bounds of our solar system. The way that we know that is the steady stream of particles emitted from the sun, that's being conceptualized in that picture, were being detected by the probe and then suddenly dipped. This indicated that it had crossed the heliopause, the term for the outer edge of the sun's protective bubble of particles and magnetic field. Now, to get outside of the solar system takes a while, even if you're going super fast. So understand that that probe was launched in 1977. So it has been out there for quite some time. It was launched 16 days before Voyager 1. That was the first object to leave the solar system. It just took a more circuitous route to get out there. And to give you an idea of what it takes to break the bounds of our solar system, it's now 11 billion miles from Earth, and it's traveling at roughly 34,000 miles per hour. But despite that, despite going faster than any person can imagine going on Earth, it has taken literally decades to leave our solar system. Meanwhile, in Costa Rica, something with a sloth. No, Costa Rica apparently went 300 days on purely renewable energy last year, beating their previous record of 299 days. I have no idea how they were so close together, but good news in both cases, although not perfect news actually. So they do have a lot of renewable energy, that is to their credit. They have hydropower is the largest energy generator, bringing in 78% of the country's renewable energy. They also have wind and geothermal, which are smaller, and biomass and solar at just 1%. So that is good. But the 300 days on purely renewable energy, it turns out is actually just their electricity production. There was still a ton of oil used in transportation, natural gas and things like that as well. But they're basically free of coal, which is obviously a very big part of our energy production in the US still. So it's not a perfect story. They do still need to get off of oil. They need to get off of natural gas because those are terrible for the environment as well. But if they can drastically cut down their carbon emissions for electricity generation, that is good news. And it should hopefully be inspirational for countries like the US that have made less progress, but that have this opening that right now in our country, we are having a discussion about the future of not only our approach to climate change, but basically the structure and foundation of our economy. Is it going to be an economy that is based on generating maximum profits for the people who own and chair those corporations? Or is it going to be based on producing an economy that is sustainable, not just for economic output, but also for human life as well? So Costa Rica, while it still has some room for improvement as well, provides an example of where the US could potentially go in the near future if we're wise and if we take these threats seriously. That said, we're basically out of time for this episode. If you haven't already rated the podcast, please do so. Write a review, take a screenshot, send it to me. It would very much please me. And we will be back tomorrow morning with much more news for you. Thank you for listening to the Damage Report podcast, the show covering the true threats facing our country and what you can actually do about them. You can support this free podcast by leaving us a review and giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening to it. Every review helps more people discover the show at no cost to you. Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Iadarola. I'll see you soon.